Well, hello, this is session 12 in my video series, 5 Minutes of Church History. Each video is about 5 minutes long on the subject of church history, designed to help the average Christian begin to be familiar with this important subject. And I've been doing a few videos on the subject of the persecution of early Christians, and this is the second one of those. I mentioned last time that the persecutions of the church that occurred in the 2nd century, that is the 100s, were largely sporadic and localized. They were carried out mostly by provincial Roman officials, largely for pragmatic purposes among the people in their particular jurisdiction. And these persecutions in the 2nd century, the 100s, were carried out certainly with the consent of various emperors, but no emperor in the 2nd century instituted an empire-wide policy of persecution. But this, of course, all changed in the 3rd century, that is the 200s AD. The first half of the 3rd century was a time of reprieve for Christians in the Roman Empire, but in 249 AD, Decius became emperor for 2 years. Beginning in 250, he instituted the first empire-wide persecution of Christians, which lasted for the duration of his short reign. And as Nick Needham has pointed out in his volume on this period of history, there are really 2 major events that instigated this first empire-wide persecution. First, in 247, Christians had refused to join the 1000th anniversary of the founding of Rome celebration, because that celebration had involved, pagan worship of the traditional gods. And of course, their refusal to join in these great festivities led to them becoming very unpopular in the empire among the people, as well as the Roman government. In 248, the northern Germanic tribes called the Goths began to sweep down and invade the Roman Empire, leading to many calamities. And many people, including people in high places in the Roman Empire, blamed these calamities on the fact that Christians had led so many people away from worshiping the traditional gods and had thereby made the gods angry. And so that too created a strong anti-Christian sentiment. And Emperor Decius shared these common anti-Christian sentiments, and so in 250 AD he instituted the first empire-wide persecution of Christians, really in an attempt to eliminate the Christian church from the Roman Empire. Decius began executing church leaders. Many bishops were martyred. Others survived by going into hiding. Decius also required that everyone in the empire sacrifice to the gods and then obtain a certificate confirming that they had done so. And those who refused were imprisoned and tortured, or they were killed. And obviously, this put Christians in a particular bind. The great Christian theologian Origen was one of those who suffered greatly during this persecution. Of course, many Christians refused to offer the required sacrifice and were killed, became martyrs. Others didn't offer the sacrifice, but obtained by way of bribery, basically a fake certificate, saying that they had offered the required sacrifice when they really hadn't. And still others just simply gave in and offered the sacrifice in order to save their lives. Well, Decius died in battle with the Goths in 251 after just a short 2-year reign. But in 257, the new emperor, Valerian, renewed the empire-wide persecution which Decius had begun, implementing similar policies as Decius had. He prohibited church meetings. He sought to wipe out Christian leaders, bishops, and presbyters. He required the sacrifice to the gods on pain of imprisonment, torture, or death. And many, many more Christians were martyred during this time. Others compromised under the threat of persecution. This Valerian persecution lasted until his death in 260. So between the reigns of Decius and Valerian, the church experienced 5 years of empire-wide persecution. And even though these persecutions were brief, relatively speaking, they were very intense and did a great deal of damage to the church. Even though, of course, they did have a refining effect upon the church as well. One of the martyrs of this period was the famous Bishop of Carthage, Cyprian. He died during the persecution of Valerian, and interestingly, a written account of his public examination prior to his execution on September 4th, 258 AD has survived to today, and it reads this way. Galerius Maximus, are you Thasius Cyprianus? Cyprian, I am. Galerius, the most sacred emperors have commanded you to conform to the Roman rites. Cyprian, I refuse. Galerius, take heed for yourself. Cyprian, do as you are bid. In so clear a case, I may not take heed. Galerius, after briefly conferring with his judicial council with much reluctance, pronounced the following sentence, quote, you have long lived an irreligious life and have drawn together a number of men bound by an unlawful association and professed yourself an open enemy to the gods and the religion of Rome, and the pious, most sacred and august emperors have endeavored in vain to bring you back to conformity with their religious observances. Whereas, therefore, you have been apprehended as principal and ringleader in these infamous crimes, you shall be made an example to those whom you have wickedly associated with you. The authority of law shall be ratified in your blood. He then read the sentence of the court from a written tablet. It is a sentence of this court that Thasius Cyprianus be executed with the sword. And Cyprian replied, thanks be to God. He was immediately taken out and beheaded. This is just an example of the type of persecution which occurred during this period. And next time, we'll look at the final great persecution which occurred later on.